That was nice. We got some woos. Hello, everyone. Brian's a bit cold, so bear with us. But we are going to dive into this in just a minute. We are also, before we get started, going to ask you folks to have a little chat with one another, because what we're planning to do this evening is really hold this question of, does art really matter now? Like now? And we're going to wade into that, and we're going to want you to be part of that with us. Before we get started, before we invite you to say hello to someone you don't know, so just to get your bravery muscles working, I'm going to introduce myself briefly and frame the conversation and the series of events that this is part of. So my name's Jon Alexander. As Chris very kindly said, I wrote a book called Citizens, Why the Key to Fixing Everything is All of Us, a very unambitious title, I'm sure you'll agree, with a foreword by a certain gentleman on the stage this evening. The core offer in the book is a way of seeing the moment in time we're living in through the lens of what I call stories of self and society. And my argument is that what we're living in right now is the collapse of a particular story. And so I talk about a shift from the subject story at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th, where the right thing to do was keep our heads down, do as we were told, get what we were given. That story collapsed under the weight of its own contradictions at that time. And out of the two world wars, we more or less deliberately, more or less consciously constructed what I call the consumer story, which is rooted in an idea that if we all pursue our self-interest, that will add up to the collective interest, that if we channel individual agency, that will create the best possible society. And really the argument I'm making is that in this moment we are seeing that logic meet its end. You can't solve the challenges of our time from within that logic because it created them. You can't solve a crisis of loneliness and mental ill health from within a story that says that we're independent, isolated individuals. You can't solve a crisis of inequality from within a story that says that the world is a competition. And you can't solve an ecological crisis from within a story that says we're separate from nature, that success is material standards of living. And so as that story collapses, I think what we're seeing is the return of the subject story. We're seeing the apotheosis of the consumer. We're seeing that kind of crazed market logic. And we're also, I think, seeing an opportunity, and the reason why the book is called Citizens, because there is another story, an idea of ourselves as citizens, not just as consumers or as subjects, an idea that actually the best way to face the challenges of our time is to tap into the ideas and energy and resources of everyone. That the logic is that all of us are smarter than any of us, and we can reinvent and reimagine our institutions to tap into that. And bringing that to democracy, and the reason for this series of events, which is called Adventures in Democracy, this is, I think, number 6 in the series, is because, in particular, in democracy, we have those stories manifestly showing up. We have what I would call a consumer democracy, where people's only agency is to choose between a fixed set of options every now and then, where we're encouraged to make that choice in the act of voting on the basis of self-interest, and that simply isn't commensurate with the scale of the challenge. And what we could be seeing, what is trying to emerge, I believe, is what I call citizen democracy, something where actually we're involved in many different ways. And so in this context, the Adventures in Democracy series, which I named just over a year ago, feeling rather more boisterous about the idea of adventuring rather than where we are right now, the idea was to say, what is it to explore that possibility? What is it to wade into that and find different paths? And so that's just to say a brief word about the context for this conversation, and really the way we are taking the word democracy is not in a kind of, let's defend what the Economist Intelligence Unit defines as democratic systems. It's an exploration of what it really means for people to have meaningful power to shape their lives. And so with that spirit, before... There's such a big drum roll to these two brilliant humans. Before we come to us and them, I'm going to invite you to turn to someone you don't know and just we're going to give you 3 or 4 minutes just to start the conversation. We're going to send you back into this a bit later on. But just turn to someone you don't know and have a little bit of a first conversation with that question, does art really matter now? Yeah? And if you're at home on the live stream, have a reflect, all right? You can do that. So yes, please turn to someone you don't know, have a first conversation, and we'll come back. If you can see me, raise your hand and stop talking. Look at that beautiful thing. Thank you very much. We're not going to take soundings just now. We're going to have a bit of conversation, and then we're going to invite you back into that, and then we're going to take a few soundings, if that's allowed. So let's get into it. Does art really matter now? And with me, if you don't know who Brian Eno is, frankly, I can't help you. You shouldn't be here. Betta and I are rather less august, but we're getting there, aren't we, Betta?
I don't know, maybe this is helping.
Maybe this is helping. So Betta Adriansa, deeply beautiful, wonderful human who I've become a friend over the last little while. Also an artist, novelist, and an educator in the arts, and has worked with Brian together to create this beautiful book, What Art Does, an unfinished theory. And we will be referring to that fairly extensively through the conversation. Where I want to start, so the plan for the conversation is I've pulled out 5 sound bites from the book that I absolutely love to start an argument with these two about. And so we're going to get to that in a moment, but before we do, just defining our terms a little bit. So does art really matter right now? And I'm going to you've written a book called What Art Does. So I'm going to come to Betta and ask you to define art, and then I'm going to come to Brian and ask him to say a word about now and what we mean by that before we get into the sound bites. So, Betta, art. What do we mean?
It's such a big question. What does art mean? And there's been so many books written about it, and we realized we don't want this book to be about the definition of art, but we definitely need to address it in the beginning. When we use the word art, what do we mean? And in the book we say art is a way of making feelings happen, art is everything we don't have to do. And when I was in art school, I made a drawing of a fly in an airplane. And I handed it to my teacher for feedback. And he looked at it and he said, this is not art. And I was very taken aback because I was really invested in making art. Because I was in art school, I'd been making art all my life, I thought. And then he informed me, this is not art. This is something else. Perhaps it's culture or a hobby or something, but it's not art. And we had philosophy classes where we read books about art. What is art? You read Kant and Hume and all the big thinkers. And they describe art as something rather complicated, very lofty, something that is often transgressive or spiritual almost, something that has really heightened qualities. And I didn't recognize myself in this description being this divine apparatus, but I didn't really have the words to counter it. And I read loads of these books because I was trying to understand how can I and my fellow students all feel like artists, make art, but we don't fit the definition, and sometimes we don't even get it. What is happening here? And it was striking to me that there is very often this hierarchy in art, even when thinkers include different forms of art in art, when it isn't just paintings and operas. When they include other forms of art, they make kind of a ladder. So here you have operas and conceptual art and performances, and then in the middle you have maybe architecture and design, and then at the bottom you have things like this shirt that Brian painted. Painting shirts, nail polish, knitting. And I objected to that ladder. And then I met Brian. I started teaching at art school. I met Brian, and he had thought about this question for, 40 years, something like this. And his definition was, in accordance with what I was feeling, we are all doing art all the time. There's no difference between Kafka writing a book where somebody wakes up as an insect and my grandma embroidering a pillow. It's the same activity, different skill levels, different value, but it's the same activity. It comes from the same source. So in the book we say, art is a way of making feelings happen. That's what we do it for, to make feelings happen. And what art is everything we don't have to do.
Lovely. Brian, do you want to build on that and maybe run yourself into the question, how do we understand now?
Yes, so just to continue with what Bette was saying, by art is everything we don't have to do, what I meant was there are some things you have to do, like you have to eat, but you don't have to invent complex cuisines with melted gold leaf on them and things like that. You have to wear clothes, but you don't have to have fashions and styles and so on. You could do it with animal skins or with just Hessian rags or uniforms. So it seems to be an inevitable predisposition in all humans to decorate and to elaborate and to have very strong feelings about those decorations and elaborations. I mean, the most obvious example is an artwork that nearly everyone in this room except me has, which is a haircut. People have strong feelings about how their hair is arranged, and people will say to you, I wouldn't be seen dead looking like that, pointing at another hairstyle. So
I thought you were about to point at me then.
So we have very strong feelings about the things that we make that I would call art. I mean, I include haircuts and chewing gum wrappers and different ways of walking and all of the things humans do as stylistic exuberance, if you like. So the question is, what are we doing when we do that? But perhaps I'll leave that part of the question. Why are we expending all that energy that could be doing something presumably useful in economical terms, but in fact very often is doing nothing particularly useful in functional terms? So what is it we're doing? Humans and other creatures don't tend to do useless things. The things that look exuberant and wasteful are actually serving some purpose. Anyway, to answer your other question, you said, what is the character of now? What's the nature of now? So it's both thrilling and terrifying in the sense that the structures that we thought existed and were reliable turn out to be completely unreliable, and it turns out that nobody understands the situation better than you or I do. We used to think, even, in fact, it's liberals who let go of this idea last, that governments kind of knew what they were doing, and that in the end things would get sorted out by governments. That's what happened in the last election in America. You know, Kamala Harris turned out to be the candidate for the status quo, sort of saying, we only need a few little tweaks and everything will be all right. But nobody believed her, or not enough people believed her. So we're in a situation now where the traditional layers of expertise that we thought were deeply embedded in the society turn out to be not very deeply embedded, and turn out in the end to not be particularly wise either. So that's the terrifying part. The thrilling part is it means it's ours to reinvent. And that's where I think we are now. More and more people are thinking, we've got to think it up for ourselves. It's down to us. And that means we've got to get off our asses a little bit.
You had you mentioned something in the foreword that you very kindly contributed to the book, which you have to buy the book to read. No, you mentioned something. You talked about the sort of two phases of a revolution. I'd love you to bring that into the space, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, there's a great book by a Russian writer called Sergei Yurchak, and he was writing about the last generation of the Soviet Union. He was a young person then, and he's talking about Russian punk and so on and so on. And the book has a beautiful title. It's called Everything Was Forever Until It Was No More. And that sort of captures the fact that communism dissolved overnight. It evaporated over one night. One night, it was a huge empire. The next morning, it was gone. It was no longer an empire. And so it's about the idea that change, when it happens, can happen very, very suddenly, very quickly indeed, and it can be quite radical, as it was in the Soviet Union. And he has a nice sentence in there. At least I think he does, though I've never been able to find the sentence again in the book.
I think you should just start claiming it for yourself.
I think maybe I did think it up, yeah. I went through the whole book again. He says revolutions happen in two phases. The first phase is where everybody realizes that things have gone completely wrong, sort of the phase we're in now. The second phase, and the important one, is where everybody realizes that everybody else has realized it as well. And at that point, that's when you get a big change, when you look around and you think, we're all in the same mind. We all know it.
And we start to build something else.
Yeah, you start to build something else, or you start to destroy something old, which is, of course, what is happening in America now.
Yeah.
I mean, there is a revolution. We're in a revolution now. Trouble is, we didn't recognize it because we didn't start it. You know, we expected the revolution to come from the left, but actually it came from the right, and it's the wrong revolution, unfortunately.
So it's time to start another one, my friends.
Yeah,
so with that
is.
in mind, so we have an understanding of the moment, a moment of revolution, a moment that's both thrilling and terrifying. We have an understanding of art as everything we do for its own sake, that we don't have to do, and a way of making feelings happen. Let's bring those a bit closer together. I'm going to walk us through my 5 favourite sound bites thus far. And the first one picks up pretty much there. So this one, the writing in this book is phenomenal. Feelings are our antennae. They are what guides us into the future. And I'm going to ask Betta to respond to this first. But I'm going to play a little bit at being a bit punchy on this, right? Feelings now aren't they a bit soft?
It's a good question. I don't know why feelings have such a bad reputation. I really don't know how this happened. I think it has something to do with the fact that we can't measure them. So they haven't really firmly landed in science. But if you think about your life, the past 10 years, maybe you picked somebody to have a baby with, or you bought a house, or maybe you didn't like your career and you changed it, or you had an existential crisis and you decided to be a different kind of person who treated others differently. Those were big moments, and they were all feelings-based. All the decisions you made were probably, at least for a big part, feelings-based. Most people, when they choose somebody to sleep with, are not going down a list of, I need this person to be like this and that and have that kind of height and that kind of income, because it's attraction. And it's feelings-based. And the same with your friendships, the kind of neighborhood that you feel comfortable in, the kind of workplace that you feel comfortable in. So feelings guide our everyday life all the time. And when you talk about the now and politics, it's all feelings. There's a lot of feelings of fear happening. There's some feelings of anger, which might also be fear. And the politicians are tapping into those feelings. So, yeah, feelings now, lots of feelings all the time, everywhere. And art is a way, is our way to recognize feelings, process feelings, change feelings, celebrate feelings, suppress feelings, remember feelings. It's really our method to become more sophisticated towards our feelings. And in the book we say art is fictional, art is safe. So art is a place where you can address certain feelings without it having any direct consequences. And the first time we talked about this, I immediately thought, but art is also really dangerous and dictators always want to lock up the artist. That is true. Art is also dangerous, but it's a fictional place. You can close the book, you can leave the gallery, you can take off the dress, you can stop dancing. It's not like when your house is on fire and it's escapable. Art is escapable. And that's why it's such a great place for us to practice our feelings. If you read a book about a zombie apocalypse, you can have all the feelings, but you don't have to deal with the zombies, It's a way to go through the feelings. Or you read a book about two people going through a divorce and being really sad and complicated. You can test out what that's like before you perhaps have a divorce. It's the place where you can, if you dance the tango, you can have a little bit of an affair of sorts, a passionate affair without having a passionate affair. So it's our place to explore our feelings. So that's why it's important, and also in relation to the now, we need this now. Yeah. Maybe more than ever, maybe we always needed it, I don't know.
It makes me think, and Brian, you might want to comment briefly on this, of Ece Temilkuran, the Turkish writer, who's written a lot about the politics of emotion and how that's been used, that's been understood and embraced by the far right and the rising fascism, and not understood by the sort of politics of rationality with which has responded. So having sort of postured my kind of feelings, aren't they a bit soft? I think actually understanding the role of feelings in this moment in relation to democracy is arguably critical.
Yeah. Well, what Ece wrote about in her beautiful book is a process where the left very assiduously and kind of suppressed feelings. Feelings were not supposed to be part of the equation. Marxism and what followed was supposed to be a sort of rational processing of society, and it was a very good attempt, actually. I'm not anti-Marxist, but the idea was that we should take all of that feeling stuff out of the equation, a bit like we were constructing science. You know, science works by removing the feeling from situations. You should be able to design an experiment so it should come out the same way, whether you've got a cold or you're a Catholic or you're a drama queen. You know, that shouldn't make any difference to your results. So science is the process of trying to remove all of those incidental, ephemeral circumstances and trying to isolate a situation and to defend it from those so you can see how something behaves. I think art is almost exactly the opposite. It's an attempt to say, this is complicated and messy, how do I feel about it? You know, literature, not only literature is easy to see how that works, and films and any narrative form, but I think it's true of jewelry or earrings or makeup or anything else. They're all ways of putting yourself into another world and seeing what that feels like.
That maybe leads us into the second of my favourite quotes, which is, play is how children learn, art is how adults play. And again, I feel like saying, well, if feelings are soft, like, are you really telling people to play now? And maybe you are.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what's happening. So we all understand, at least since the end of the Victorian times, that playing for children is not surplus, pointless activity. Playing is their primary way of understanding the world, of understanding what materials can do, what you need, what you like, what you don't like, how that person feels about this person, empathy, all of the social structures, everything, we learn about it in play. And children do that with absolutely no encouragement and incessantly. And then when they're aged about 11, we suddenly tell them that they ought to get serious and stop playing around. And we start teaching them really important things, like how to fill in a tax form. But of course, my sort of realization was, of course, those things don't just suddenly end in you. That's the primary human driver, that. So I thought, where does it go? What happens to it? And then I thought, oh, of course, that's what art is. Art is us continuing to play and continuing to explore the things that we have explored as children: social relationships, materials, tastes, feelings, all of the things that kids do. But we now call it art. And having reached that point, I thought, so art is actually a very, very broad activity, from cardigans to Cézanne, you know, everything in between is all part of it. And of course, this is sort of controversial in the art world, which likes to think that it has a sort of special claim to divinity, and that what artists do is some sort of rather refined and rare thing. I don't think it's that rare at all. I think we all do it. I mean, we've all made a lot of aesthetic choices tonight, including this one. And all of you you've spent your whole day looking at and responding to art without possibly giving it that kind of name. But in fact, a lot of the choices we make are exhibited on us. We walk around as self-made, you know, this is who I am, sort of thing. So if you take a very small object like an earring, how can you call that an artwork, you might say, or is it serious as an artwork? And I think what happens when you look at an earring, you look at something for which you already know, you have a lot of vocabulary for. You've seen earrings all your life. You've seen big bulbous ones, and you've seen little brilliant, very valuable ones, and you've seen ones made out of elastic bands and lollipop sticks. You've got a whole sort of canon of earring design in your mind. just as you do with paintings. If you look at paintings or listen to symphonies, you already have a history of these things. So what you're seeing is the difference between this particular instance and all the other ones you've seen. And it might be, oh, this is more brittle, or this is less tidy than any earring I've ever seen. That's an interesting message, you know. That's different. And so I think we respond not to any sort of intrinsic quality of things, an absolute quality. We respond to their difference from other things we've seen in that language, if you like. So a little thing like an earring is really a fragment of a possible other world. Imagine a world as messy as that. Yeah. Imagine a world made of things that were both incredibly valuable, like diamonds, and things that were incredibly valueless, like pieces of chewing gum paper. That's an interesting world.
And that when I was reading this and having that initial reaction, which I did have to the idea that play is something that we need to champion, and then talking to you, reading the book more, it made me actually think of my favourite story from the research for my book, which is the transformation of the Taiwanese government, Taiwanese democracy over the years, over the last 10 years or so. And I won't tell it in full here now, but the core of this story is that in response to a communication from government in around 2012 that essentially said, shush little people, just go shopping, we'll grow the economy and you'll be fine, a group of hackers, sort of computer artists, you might say, started to play with what they thought government might be like, and what they did was they created parallel websites to government websites, all with the URLs that ended g0v.tw, and they called themselves gov0. And they were playing effectively, they were making art, and actually it became very serious because on these websites you could participate in the decision making, you could discuss it at home, you could be part of it, and a couple of years down the line, a big protest moment came. I might come to you to say a word about that protest moment in a moment. And the result of that protest moment actually was that the operations of government over time largely stepped into the operations of Gov0. But I interviewed a few people around that moment in the research for the book, and a couple of different people said to me, if it hadn't been adopted, it would just have been an art project. Yeah. And so that idea of actually even as something as serious as how we do democracy differently really does need us to play. And I am going to make it so in the Taiwanese moment there was a thing called the Sunflower Revolution in 2014 that people occupied the parliament, and art was more a part of that moment as well, right?
Yes, I heard Audrey Tang talk about this revolution, and I was just curious, did they have a song? Because a lot of revolutions and big changes have a song, and they did have a song. I think it was called Sunrise Island, and when everybody was occupying the universities, there was this a band member who felt very passionate about his friends being there and being unsafe and being away from their homes, and he wrote the song in one night. And what I really like about the story is that, which ties in with the notion of play, is that not all the lyrics had to do with political stuff or trying to achieve things, or, you know, the lyrics aren't, we want a revolution and we need the government to do this and this. A lot of songs that embody a movement don't have anything to do content-wise with the stuff that people are rationally thinking about. And that's, I think, very often where we go wrong with art when we combine art and politics, is where we think we want more inclusion. Here we have a musician. Let the musician make a song about inclusion, and then the people will like it, and then there will be more inclusion. Yeah. And that's not how it works. So very often it's really surprising which kind of songs are adopted by a movement. And
I have to move us on to the next one, because I know Betta has an amazing story for the next of my quotes as well, that is directly related to this. So the next of my quotes, art is a reservoir of shared experiences. Art is a reservoir of shared experiences, the circulatory system of community. Art Makes Communities. And I want you to share your story about the post office.
Yeah, we're the post story. I used to deliver the post in Amsterdam. It's a great job, especially if you're a writer. So you move a bit, you get out of your house. It wasn't very well paid, and it was during a time when there was a lot of layoffs at the post. People who had worked there for decades were getting fired. So there was a lot of tension. And we would go in and we would have to sort the mail, and then we would go out and deliver it. And while we were sorting the mail, there was always a radio channel playing with Dutch music. And there was this one song, and when it came on, everybody sang it. Everybody just stopped what they were doing, and we sang it together. And there were people there who didn't speak Dutch so well. There was mostly men, but also women. And this song is called Maar vanavond heb ik hoofdpijn. And this translates as, but tonight I'll have a headache. And it's about a woman withholding affection from her husband because he's been annoying. So everyone, including my boss, who was also very stressed out, sang the song. But tonight I have a headache. We sang it passionately, and then we continued our day. And while we were singing, we had a moment of unity. We had a moment of being being together. We had a moment of fun, of being in the moment. I don't know how to measure, the value of something like this. I had no idea how you can measure it. But I think it was valuable. And that ties in what I said before and about play. It's very hard to plan this, to structure this. And that's why it's so scary to do art, because you can spend an hour working in the soup kitchen, super useful, you're an engaged citizen, if I do this, it's useful. Or you can write a weird poem, which is maybe not useful, like a poem about a pineapple or something. So that choice is very hard. And that's why I think a lot of artists get a little bit, I know I got a little bit stressed about having to make art that was useful, and horrible art comes out of it. So you have to have a level of trust that some of your ideas will seep into your feelings, and that it doesn't all have to be rational.
I love this, and I love the statement art makes communities, and the idea of a circulatory system of community, and it rings so true. So a lot of the work I'm involved in is on the one hand, the sort of opening of institutions, the sort of reorienting institutions to tap into people, but on the other hand, championing the power in communities. And it's so fascinating how often I'm looking at the wonderful Josie Moon, who's in the front row from East Marsh United in Grimsby, and one of many community organisations for whom art and performance and celebration is right at the heart of what they've done from the very beginning. The Sun and Moon Arts Festival in Grimsby that is a huge part of what they're doing. So that absolutely rings true. Brian, you wanted to?
Yeah. So the only thing we have actually, since we're not billionaires, is solidarity in numbers. That's all we've got going for us, really. They've got all the money, and the question becomes, how do you create solidarity? And I would say almost the primary way we do that is through art, in the sense of songs we sing together, films we all enjoy together, books we all know about and share. So art is a very big part of creating coherence in a society, cohesion. And the word I like is coalescence. It's the way in which people start to recognize each other. Oh, you like the same things as I do. Okay. That might be a completely apolitical thing that we both like. It might be that song you were saying. But it gives us something around which we can agree. And somebody said, we were talking about this, the question you raised in hard art, about activism versus, I'll call it demonstrationism. And Liz Slade, who's the head of the Unitarian Church, who's one of our members, said, well, it's funny, when people talk about things a lot, it takes them a long time to reach agreement. When they do something together, it happens almost immediately. And so I think sort of taking out of the sphere of language and argument and definition and cutting things up and putting it into the language of let's do something together. And, you know, as soon as you work with somebody, you start to respect them, actually. You can't help it. It doesn't matter whether you agree with them or not. And so it's sort of transcending the fix that, again, the left especially gets itself into about language.
There was a lovely thing that Ece Temelkaran, whose name has now come up twice, so I'll just briefly say, so she was one of the first participants in one of the Events and Democracy conversations, and one of the things she said was, when you zoom out, you always get fascism. When you zoom in, you can always find community, which I thought was a very powerful
Brilliant,
thing.
yes.
I'm going to move on to my fourth little quote, slightly longer one this time. So art is a way of surrendering. If we don't learn to make a balance between control and surrender, if we only know how to control, we end up in a world shrunken to the bits we can still control. I feel like that we're now getting into the stuff that feels pretty directly almost political commentary. Mm-hmm. Brian, do you want to just round that out a little bit, say where that's coming from for you?
So, a long time ago, I started to realize that most of the things that happen to people that they regard as peak experiences, sex, drugs, art, religion, are not experiences of control. They're experiences of surrender. They're experiences where you let go of something. You let go of your ability to completely understand the situation, for example. So you let yourself be taken. You know, if you think of all the language that goes with that, oh, I was completely out of it, or all the variants of that.
I thought you might go somewhere slightly more romantic than that, Brian.
It blew my mind.
There we go.
All of those expressions are ways of saying, I lost control, and I loved it. Now, it occurred to me that in our culture, of course, because we're technically so adept, we always dignify the ability to control. And indeed, it's very important to us. It's what science comes out of. It's what technology comes out of. So I'm not downplaying it. But we have another ability as well, which is the ability to surrender, which is, in fact, the ability to become part of things, not to be separate from them anymore, to become part of them. And it occurred to me that that might be equally important, especially since we spend so much of our time trying to get that experience, either by sex, drugs, fairgrounds, sports, all the sorts of things we do where something happens to us that is beyond what we anticipated or beyond what we can control. And so I then thought, so perhaps that's what we're doing in art. We're trying to create situations in which we can lose ourselves, lose that part of ourselves that sort of sees our edge as being here and sees us as being separate from everything else. Again, it's not to say that you shouldn't have that other skill as well, but it's a sort of spectrum from control to surrender. And different situations require different places on that spectrum. If you're flying a plane, you probably should be pretty close to the control end of the spectrum and not do too much surrendering. But if you're being intimate with someone, it's pretty nice to be at the other end as well, to just let something happen.
I think one of the thing I sort of want to bring in the context of our societies right now and how they're being run, there's this urge to control everything to the extent that it ends up centralizing and trying to run from, rather than putting trust in people. One of the thing that so Audrey Tang, another name that's come up twice, so I'll briefly say, also participant in an Adventures in Democracy conversation, former digital minister in Taiwan. Audrey introduced me to the the quote from the Tao Te Ching, which is to give no trust is to get no trust. And this idea that we're stuck at the moment with a lot of our political systems actually not trusting people and not creating the environments where people can participate meaningfully, shape things with a degree of uncertainty, rather than trying to control all outcomes and seeing people as to be controlled. And maybe that's something we need to embrace.
Yeah. Well, maybe you could talk about this.
I'm going to line better up for the final quote. So if you want to
Okay,
close this
so
one, then we'll close this one.
I'll go on to uncertainty. Most of the time we're uncertain about most things, and we can either fight against that and become paranoid and terrified, or we can say, I'm going to be uncertain about most things, but I'm still going to be able to make decisions. And the interesting thing is that the type of confidence that gives to people is completely different from the control type of confidence, which doesn't often extend beyond the local situation. The kind of confidence you want is, I'm used to being uncertain, and I'm uncertain now. It's fine, I'll deal with it. And again, I think this is one of the experiences of art that you, because you're surrendering, because you're entering, if it's moving you, of course not if it doesn't, but if it's moving you, what's happening is that something quite weird is going on. Why is it that one arrangement of musical sounds makes me cry and another makes me pissed off, for example? Why should that be? What are we sensitive to? What are we being sensitive to? And I think we're being sensitive to our own personal history. We've been in these situations before, and things have acquired meaning bit by bit for us and resonance, and then we become very tweakable. If you have a history of responding to things like that, you suddenly start to be noticing them all the time. For instance, I'm just sitting here noticing the shadow on Betta's chin there. I know I shouldn't be thinking about that now, but I'm sort of tuned into that.
This man is the most present individual I've ever come across. I love it. If I may, I'm going to prompt Betta with the final of our 5, and then we're going to invite you folks to have a bit of a conversation, then we'll take a few soundings from the room. So be prepared. Think about what you want to say to your friend, your new friend. So the final one is, if we want a new world, I love this, by the way. If we want a new world, we have to start making it right now. You have to live the world you want to exist in.
Yeah, it's Brian's words. He said it.
No, they're not. They're your words. Claim them.
I know I did a lot for this book. I'm very proud of it. I put a lot of work in it. But the really good quotes are from Brian. And he said it to me the first time we met. I think I may have been talking a little bit about powerlessness or hopelessness or something. And he said, if you want a new world, start making it right now. Start making it in whatever you are doing. Start making the world that you want to be in. In every object that you make, every interaction, every system, every conversation. And it made me feel like this new world that I was longing for, that I was doing my social work for, was right around the corner. But maybe not on a big scale, but maybe in my interaction with the person at the bakery, or in the way I hold my teacup. And I know that sounds a little bit out there, but if you start adopting this as a way of living, you can change every single moment into a little world that is a world that you like. You know, the government has, I don't know how to measure it, but I don't know, maybe 10% influence on your average day, or sometimes 20%, sometimes 50%. But there is chunks of your day that are not influenced by governments or political situations or rules, that are completely free for you to turn around. We can now all stand on our heads, and nobody will be able to do anything about it. You can be super nice or really mean the rest of the day. Nobody will be able to do anything about it.
Mhm.
You know, you can start designing objects that you wish that existed in the world, even if nobody will use them, at least they are there. So I find that a liberating notion, because we experience so much powerlessness.
Yeah.
Do you want to come in briefly?
Yes, I think I'll just add one thing to that. The one commodity we all have that everybody wants is our attention. The whole of the internet exists to engage your attention and then to redirect it somewhere that they would rather it were, you know, buying products or following political leaders or whatever else. So your attention is incredibly valuable. And it ought to be very valuable to you as well. You know, instead of us constantly playing with whatever is served up on our phones and computers, we should be shepherding our attention with much more care than we do. We're still fascinated by this sweet shop that we're constantly in, and new sweets keep, oh, I must try that one, I must try that one, you know. And I think that is the biggest task that all humans face if they're not starving. If you're above the starvation level, the biggest task you face now is to take care of your attention and to find out what you ought to be looking at. And I think one of the things that artists do sometimes is to keep reminding you what it is that you really like. My friend John Hassell, the trumpeter, died a couple of years ago, he used to say, the most important question you can ask yourself is, what is it I really like? Not what should I like, what would they like me to like, but what is it I actually like? What's the thing that keeps me going? And it's so easy to lose touch with that. And I think art is one of the ways we remind ourselves of it. We think, that's beautiful. I love that, that's beautiful. That's another way of saying, that really matters to me. So that's, there are several in the book. There are several other
There's a few other sound bites. And by
I-
paying attention to those things, we're actually creating the world we want to be in.
It's a very small book.
It was getting smaller every time they wrote it.
Yeah,
I'm going to
well-
invite you folks to turn back to the person you spoke to. We're going to give you 7 minutes, and then
I'm
we're going
gonna
to
go
take
to
a
the
few
toilet.
soundings. And the way we're going to do the soundings, I'm going to warn you now, we're going to keep it to 59 seconds maximum, the report back, so we can hear a few different voices, and then we're going to give Betta and Brian a chance to sort of close the space. So 7 minutes in conversation, and then we'll hear a few soundings from the room. Away you go. Okay, if you can see me, please raise your hand and stop talking. If you can see me, please raise your hand and stop talking. Third time's a charm. If you can see me, please raise your hand and stop talking. Thank you, my friends. So as I say, we want to hear some voices into the conversation, and I'd love, please do ask a question if you want to, but I'd love to hear contributions into this question of like, does art really matter now? So we'll take, and we're going to keep to this 59-second rule, and I will start talking over you. I apologise in advance. I've got my little timer. But let's see some hands. Who would like to contribute? We've got a lady right down the front here. If we can get a mic down here. A lady.
Hi, I'm Jo. I run an organisation called 64 Million Artists, and we were chatting with Josie and Patrick, but we were talking about the idea that there's loads of pockets of brilliant work like Josie's and work that we do with communities up and down in the UK. This work is it's happening. People are doing this. They're doing small acts of revolution through creativity all the time. The problem is that it's really it's isolated, and so one of the things we're already planning, like how do we gather the people that already get it, because so many people do. And I think too often the conversation about art feels incredibly lofty, and it's had by very nice people like the people in this room, you know, and actually that's not true. That work is happening all up and down the country with people of all kinds doing that stuff, but often those people feel excluded from the national conversation. And actually we need to, what I really liked, we're planning a whole series of events around, you know, how creativity can change the world, but I really like that thing around let's not talk at those events. Let's do stuff, and let's be creating while we're doing it. 59 seconds.
58 seconds. Look at that.
It's my creativity practice.
That is how to model an answer, my friends. Okay. Thank you. We're going to take 3 or 4 soundings, and then we'll come back. So let's just go, right behind you, and then we'll go back to the right.
Hello, Brian, Betta, John, everybody. I have a question for you all, but technically also for everybody, which is if any of you all have done the artist's way.
I haven't.
I've done a bit.
You have? It helps a lot with this. If anybody hasn't, I encourage you to.
There we go.
Thank you.
So we've got a tip, the artist's way, and we've got a question about how we connect it all up and an intention to start doing so. And do also look up 64 Million Artists, amazing organisation. We'll come behind you. Yeah, go.
I already have a microphone.
Oh, sorry.
So no worries. Stand up. Thank you for such a fantastic... Oh, sorry. I'll wait for the timer. I'm not going to try and cheat.
This is so well behaved. I like this. Please, you may begin.
Thank you so much. Thank you for such an amazing conversation. I think the 3 of us were all like really simulated. There were so many themes. I just wanted to name maybe kind of a couple of them back. One is around imagination. We talked about that. My background, I'm a futurist, and I think storytelling art is a really big part of how we can collectively imagine in order to create different futures. So I just think that there was a really big theme around art as a powerful tool for imagination. Another thing we talked about was we loved what you said around the kind of revolution and the fact that the revolution, we didn't, assuming people in this room a bit more left-leaning, didn't see it coming. And we were kind of curious about how art can be manipulated or co-opted in order to try and provoke feelings that might be divisive in the end. So I think that was another theme. I'll stop there just in case. I'm not sure how many seconds I've got left. Two things.
You had 10, but you've stopped
okay.
now. Okay, we'll come over this way if we may.
Thanks very much. You ready? Okay, playing by the rules. I'm Christoph, and I'm from Common. We enable communities to buy and manage land for nature recovery. I previously built an organisation called Open Cinema, which helps homeless people and other disadvantaged communities to have their own cinemas and make their own films. So I'm absolutely flying your flag. The great German artist, Joseph Beuys, said, everyone is an artist. And the question, therefore, is why aren't we all being artists? What is in the way of everybody realising what would happen if everybody actually could behave as if they were an artist? And my friend here, my new friend here, thinks it might be something to do with space and the fact that we all need spaces, because I think it's great. There are 8 billion artists, but we need the space to become 8 billion Enos or 8 billion whatever it is that we might become.
Space, yeah? Okay, where are we going now? Should we come over this way somewhere? Have we got any on this side of the room? This side of the room has been very quiet so far. There we go. Thank you. Oh.
Hello, I'm Ben. I was unsurprised but slightly disappointed to hear the term left v right used, and I'm wondering if there's a more creative and artistic way of framing the challenge than that paradigm. Can we move beyond that, and is there a route that you can think of that these great creative minds could introduce into the room as the evening goes on?
I love that. Let's come back and we'll hear a few thoughts, and then we might have time for another. Well, probably won't have time for another round. But Brian, better pick up where you like. I think you're about to start.
Well, let's
Do you want to
start
bring the mic
with
a
that
little
question. Oh, sorry. We were talking about this coming over here, and we said left and right. It's just completely out of date. And what about up and down? Better suggested that we could superimpose over left and right the axis of up and down, so you could have up left and down right, and so on. And
I think we can all imagine what down left looked like. But
well, we've heard a lot of down left, yeah. So it's a kind of optimism scale that the down is the negative side, the up is the positive, the optimistic side. So we wondered if you'd put that, so you would then think that the uprights and the up lefts would have quite a lot of conversation in common, more than maybe the uprights would have with the downrights. I know a few uprights, they're nice people. So,
did you want to chip in on this better?
I'm also very tired of the left-right thing, and it's not very helpful. So it's a good question. And if somebody comes up with something better than the up-down left-right system, I'm also very open to it.
I want to bring in just from the another of the events in this series so far. I'm very good at promoting my series, aren't I? I hosted Baratunde Thurston and his creative and life partner Elizabeth Stewart, who between them run a number of projects, but one is a podcast called How to Citizen, where they use the word citizen as a verb. And what Baratunde talks about a lot is it's not so much a left-right other side as a we-me other side that is at issue in this moment. And I think that distinction between a kind of a we and a me is perhaps a more useful one. So just bringing that in from a past event. But thank you. And maybe you need both. And maybe there needs to be some movement between those things, and we need to stop saying that one is better than the other, but we certainly need some rebalancing. There's whole riches there. There were a few other prompts in there. The concept, like art and imagination, fairly closely related. And I feel another of the events that we've held was with a woman called Phoebe Tickell, who works on imagination activism and the idea that there is a question of imagination justice in this time, and so that enabling everyone to imagine the future being part of this challenge. But we also had some of the questions around, like, is it about space? Is it about spaces and places? Yeah. How do we connect this up? And I think that overarching question, why is it that we aren't all really stepping into the artist in all of us, the sort of artist citizen, I might kind of posit.
Spaces are very important. Brian opens his studio for loads of people, and everybody is using that space to make things, and it's wonderful. So I would encourage everybody who has a space to
come and visit.
No, not to go to Brian, but to open it up. That's one thing. But I think a big part of why we don't...
We'll post the address on Twitter in a minute. No.
It's quite full already. But why we don't make art all the time, a part of it is definitely a corporate mindset. This idea of what is the input of the thing, what is the input of it, what's the output of it, and how are we going to scale it up. Even when you do a funding application for arts, they ask you things like this. What is the input? What is the output? How many people will it reach? How can you scale it up? It's terrifying, paralyzing. It's counter the art playfulness. And I do a lot of social projects. I rejected completely goal-orientedness, and we get a lot done. There's this wonderful artist, Akitami, in India, who started the first feminist library of India, who does reading sessions and read out loud sessions for people who can't read. She has a school program, art space, and she's completely without goals. She just does. She wakes up and she does, and she gets a massive amount done. So I find that very inspiring, to let go of the goal-orientedness. Don't define the goal beforehand, and just do and fail also.
Yeah.
Failing is great.
I think what you have to do now is to think, what have I got? What resources do I have? And what can I do with them? It turned out, because I have a big studio, I have this big resource. Everyone needs space, as your question implied. And so probably sometimes 3 nights a week there's 50, 60 people in the studio, either talking about something or launching a book or a new NGO or something like that. And that makes me feel so happy that suddenly this big place isn't just for me sitting on my own in one corner of it, but that it's making a difference to a lot of people. But I'm sure everybody has something they can give. So it all works if you start from the assumption that giving is actually more fun than getting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Getting is awkward.
Giving is way more fun.
Yeah.
I also want to mention that when we do these talks, afterwards I talk to people and they tell me the stuff that they've been doing, and it's always impressive, wonderful, mind-blowing, creative. And then I think back about the talk, and I think that we've been talking about why we're so paralyzed and why don't we do things. And then I meet all these people who are doing amazing things. So maybe the question is also more, why aren't we hearing about it? Because why is there so much negativity always in the news, and why don't we hear about all the cool stuff that you are all doing?
Yeah. Yeah.
On that note, my friends, I'm going to bring us to a close. Brian and Betta are running out the door to go singing back at the studio, I believe. Yep. I'm not invited because I can't sing. But I wanted to close with a quote. Well, first an announcement that you may have gathered that there's a series of these events. Did I mention that? And the next of those is on the 14th of April. I'll be hosting Erica Benner, the professor of political philosophy, who wrote the book Be Like the Fox, which is a sort of reclamation of Machiavelli, and has also written a book called Adventures in Democracy, so I couldn't not invite her. She's lived in Japan and Poland and Germany and the UK, and has really taken a full kind of tour de force of what this thing we call democracy is, and she's a lot of fun as well. So I'm really looking forward to that, and I'd love you to join us. And then I wanted to end. You can find me as well on my website's jonalexander.net. There's a mailing list. You can sign up, and I'll keep you posted on stuff. There's copies of the beautiful What Art Does and also of Citizens at the back of the room if you want to get yourself a copy. The bar will be open for a good little while if you want to continue some of those conversations and hopefully some new friends that you've made. And I will close us out. I sent an email to my mailing list about this event. And part of what I said was I'd love any reflections or comments. And one email came back that I just feel I have to sort of share to finish this. And I don't know this woman. I didn't know she was on the list. I really don't know who she is, but these words were just beautiful. She said, I just wanted to let you know I can't make it, but I program arts and crafts workshops for my day job. And every time I stop my participants on their way out at the end of the day and ask what they made, and they show me their basket or their print or their dress or whatever, the pride on their faces, the shyness, the delight, the aha. I made that, they tell me. Looks like a pretty good basket to me, I say. It's a bit wonky here, they say. First time, I say. Yes, but I made it, and I'm pretty pleased with it. And then she finishes, we need more people who feel they can make things rather than just consume things. Making art is power. Thank you all for coming. Thank you very much, Brian and Betta.
Thank you.